Good morning. I'm not sure if we've started yet, but hi, my name's David Lee. I work with Plymouth City Council's environmental health team, and I've been working very closely across the community food sector for a number of years now, and with Food Plymouth and various interventions. So, what we've done today is we've recorded a food safety update workshop that's really aimed at the voluntary food sector. And for those of you who work within it or operate within it, doing what you do, which is fantastic at such a difficult time. So we're going to go through some basics here, which firstly, the first part of the session, we'll take a break halfway through, but the first part of this session will be more about the organization itself and how it's set up and the controls that we would like to see in place and why you basically need to put those things in, and also really what the importance of telling us what it is you're doing. So we do get many questions saying, well, I'm giving food away, what's the problem? And it's all kind of okay, but it's those things that we just need to have some traceability and some record of, and to know that hygiene controls are in place. So it's about keeping the people who are really um, in need safe. So we all have a part in that. And of course, the last thing none of us would want to do is to find somebody caused harm by what it is we're doing for the right reasons, really. So we'll carry on. We'll have a look at what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to look at that question of why do I need to register with a local authority? And this is applicable really if you're in Cornwall, Devon, or other local authorities, as well as in Plymouth. The rules are basically the same, and it's about the degree of organisation and how often you do it, or the continuity as to what it is you do, how many people, how often, and what it is you're doing. So we'll look at that. We'll look at safer food, better business, and some of the controls that incredible template that's been around now for over 10 years for businesses to follow, and just look at the general rules of food hygiene and keeping a record of what it is they do and how they do it, against some simple procedures. So we'll look at the two together really, to see what's maybe suitable, or a hybrid of the both really. Um, we'll also go into after a short break. Well, after a break, second session we'll be looking at the four C's, which we call the pillars of food safety, really. And we'll have a quick look at a food safety checklist, which is a way of recording what it is you do when you do activities in a simple way, to give you some form and to give you some record, so that you can demonstrate that you are keeping food safe on the days that you do what it is you do. And then we'll look very briefly at what a food safety inspection might look like in the voluntary food sector. Okay, hope that's all right. So we'll crack on. So some of the questions we often get are, well, as you can see there, it's not really a business. We just do it for the good, out of our own time, or it's just a soup and sandwich once a week for free. So what's the risk? Um, Very infrequent activities. We only get together for an hour once a week and put food into boxes, or we're just volunteers. So why does this affect us? Um, all of those things ring true, and yes, you're absolutely correct. They do have varying degrees of risk, albeit most of them minimal. But we will peel that back a little tiny bit and just to sort of look at where problems may arise and the risks around what it is you actually do. So some of them are obvious, and some of them may not be quite so obvious to you. So we'll cover those in as we go through. Excuse me. Okay. So generally speaking, when we look at the community food sector, and this is as a regulatory body, we'll look at the activity that it is you're doing, and it might well be that you're simply collecting donated food that's already in packages and putting it into bags for people to take away, which would ordinarily be extremely low risk, and providing the food is of a best before nature in terms of its dates. Whether it's in or slightly out of date, there should be very little risk, providing it's not damaged or harmed or mouldy in any way. So if everything's still intact, food is around its best before date or slightly over, tins, packets, things like that, for others to use, then there is, as I say, minimal risk. So we would generally have a light touch, or suggest a light touch, in terms of knowing where that food came from, which is key. So which shops did you pick it up from and when? And what days did it go out, sort of thing. Those would be the kind of the extent of some records, and obviously handling it to make sure you're not doing anything outside of packaging the food that might harm that food and its packaging. So we'll look at, say, those rules, but that's what we're kind of focusing on, is from a low end of risk there to perhaps putting sandwiches together, wrapping them yourself, making a soup up from ingredients you've been donated, or even meals and serving those either cold or hot at the other end of the spectrum. So that whole breadth of activity between those are what we're talking about today, really. Um, with in terms of information and resources, there is lots of guidance out there. So the Food Standards Agency at food.gov.uk, and I recommend you remember that web address, food.gov.uk, and look for community food, and look at the resources available for organisations, whether you're a church group or just neighbours getting together, or something more organised where you're going out regularly and providing food to those in need. So they have a wealth of activities and resources there where you can access and put your operations into a new gear so that they are safely operating for the scope of what it is you're doing. It also goes through this page, as it says here in the scenarios where registration may be required, and maybe scenarios where it's not required. Have a look through that, and that will hopefully put some context into what it is I'm talking about today. So that's what the website looks like. There is reams of advice and further links onto other sites. The wrap guidance is also very useful if you are taking food and looking at its dates and packaging and how to or freezing food that you're getting that was once fresh, and having to redate some of that within guidance and within legislation. So it's important that you do follow the right rules when it comes to things like redating and repackaging, or putting labels on. Or if we're talking about breaking down food and putting it into smaller packages, that's again something to. I would recommend that you get advice from your local food hygiene or food environmental health team, wherever it is you are, before you start breaking stuff down, especially fresh foods as well. Okay, but great, loads of advice at that site there. So let's kind of have a look at a few scenarios where of how the food safety legislation is set out and how it might apply to you. Now, this is looking at really in the context where you may have a site, or you may be operating within somebody else's site, or it may be that it's your site and you're doing some good for the community where you are. So you might be running a community centre or a church, or but you're also organising events and things that go on there. So whether you are simply turning up to use somebody else's place, we'll see how things fit together in terms of what you should and shouldn't do, in terms of telling local authorities that you're there, that you're doing what you're doing. So let's say we're looking at a hall or a space, and the scenario might be that you only receive packed products, pre-packed goods, things like that, things in tins and packets and bags. Um, you might make up a few parcels or food parcels once a week in that local hall to then pass on to people who come by who are in need. So we would say that in terms of registration requirements, um, because you would need to register. So we'd say, yes, let the local authority know that you're there. So that's usually a simple process using their registration forms, or go onto the food.gov.uk and follow those links there. But if only or going through to your webs to your local council's web site and clicking on any links that say about food business registration. And for this purpose, it is a food business. I know you're not selling, but that's the catch-all that is often referred to. You're a group or an organisation that are coming together. We view it the same. So simple procedures and simple records in place to know where the food is coming from, for instance, how it is you keep your space clean, and of course personal hygiene, what food handlers do to or volunteers do to keep themselves clean, and of course not turning up with any illnesses that you might pass on to other volunteers or to people who are receiving the food. So you want to keep those things in mind. So we look at those simple procedures we'd expect to see in place for a group, where you are packaging or handling packed on packaged food. And it doesn't have to be onerous, like I say. The other thing to think about is waste and any leftover cardboard and paper. And you might say, well, that's okay. It's only little and minimal. I'll take it home. Um, the way the law is set up, you can't do that as it stands. Commercial or organisational waste, charity waste, that sort of thing, needs to be separated um, at all times from domestic waste. So you shouldn't be packing or throwing away your stuff into your own bins at home. But it's a straightforward, well, say it's straightforward. Once you've set up the process, whether you're actually transporting the waste to another site, such as a waste transfer site, or adopting a blue bag scheme, or leaving the waste at the church hall, which is often best because they will have the right arrangements in place, if that's where you operate from. So you do need to follow that correct guidance. So the Environmental Protection Act is quite careful about monitoring where waste goes, and the last thing we want to do is see any waste turn up where it's not supposed to or not welcome. And I'm sure you agree with that. So it's good advice to know how your space is set up, who's responsible for what, where the stores are there any problems or issues, is it dry, is it free from mold, if you're going to be storing food especially. Um, do any refrigeration equipment, if required, work? Who's in charge of those if things go wrong? Do you have a contact detail for maybe a committee to help fix some of those things? So we always recommend that whoever is lending you the space to operate out of, or whether you are that person who are offering the space out for a group to operate from, that you put together a contract or a service level agreement. Again, keeping it simple, like we'll provide you with the cleaning materials. You just leave the place clean before you go, as you found it. So that type of thing. If something breaks, let us know, or if something breaks, I will let the committee know, um, and so you have an understanding as to what your responsibilities as a user are, and that the hall provider will have an understanding of what they should be providing you with, and that should be agreed really before you go. Bear in mind as well that there are still health and safety at work requirements regardless. So things like preventing hazards, reducing those risks, slips, trips and falls, working at heights, all of those things still apply. So it needs to be a safe space for volunteers and for other users, people visiting. That also has to be in mind. Nothing changes there. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So now let's look at a slightly different scenario where you are maybe a community larder or cafe, which you're an external group. You're coming in to use a site. You will bring along with you maybe food or pack or store, and maybe even offer refreshments to those coming, say cups of teas or pieces of toast, tea cakes, things like that, maybe bowl of soup. So no action is required by law for the premises or site. So if you are the person hiring out that site or offering the space, then one applies really. So keep that one B recommendation. Have that service level agreement in place so that the group coming to use your place um, knows what is expected of them, and that you've made it clear of what it is you'll do to support the groups. Okay, but if you are the group coming in to use that space and your operation is a bit more complex, albeit still relatively low risk in some respects, then it still means that you need to register. So 1A in the previous blue bit applies there. So let us know what it is you're doing. We'll then help you set up in a way if necessary. We'll tell you what you should have in terms of record keeping, what that might look like, the controls in place again for cleaning, for waste, for handling food, for personal hygiene, etc., etc. For doing it. And again, it's based on risk. So if you're only handling very low risk food items, then there's less of a control needed. Just have a lighter touch to it. But if they are sort of making food from scratch and offering that on the days that you're doing it, or freezing stuff down, more complex stuff, you'll need to demonstrate that you're doing those activities in a safe manner too. Then we'd also say that if we look at what 2B says there, so if you're a group or a club where you offering regular events or regular gatherings, and food is more complex. If you're offering maybe a meal or a couple of meals or a club where people are coming along and sitting down to sort of eat one or two courses, say, for instance, to 12 or more people, then the risk is obviously increased, but there are there should be sensible controls in place, a bit like a small cafe or that sort of thing, as anyone would normally expect. And I know, again, you're saying maybe thinking, well, we are only doing this for free, for volunteering, but the same rules apply to you. So it needn't be onerous, just needs to be straightforward, where we know where food is coming from. People are acting in a hygienic way on the days, and waste is managed, and everywhere is clean and hygienic. So, final scenario here we'll look at in how the food safety legislation puts together is, now you might be, for instance, a group or a committee or a gathering of people coming together that amongst you are looking to provide those services yourselves. So um, you might appoint your own groups or have a trustee or somebody who will oversee some of those groups and clubs. But it does depend upon that level of activity. So just referring back to the stuff in the green area will apply to small scale or more involved groups, more complex organizations, such as lunch clubs and etc. So follow that guidance and think about things in a pragmatic way. And you can always talk to your local authority about what it is would be expected of you, or what plans you're thinking of putting into place, and is that sufficient? Um, there's wealth of support out there for this kind of stuff that you guys do. Okay, might sounded really complex, that, but it's basically about looking at what it is you do and having a few simple rules in place, but letting your local authority know that you're there in the first place. And then we can work with you to say what we think you should have by way of controls and record keeping. Okay, so we can see down road um, that food is safe to the people receiving it in need. Okay, so moving on slightly in terms of managing food safety and keeping an eye on those controls and some of the best practices. Now, some of you doing what it is you're putting together may have may have some involvement or have had some involvement in the food sector, whether it's in a retail or a catering environment, and others may not. So it's there's a broad church of people who come forward and provide services to those in need, and we totally get that. But there are again, lots of resources there to help try and steer you and guide you into keeping those things safe. And it's all based around principles, what we call HACCP, which has been around for decades in the food sector, and it's about risk assessments for food. So it's looking at, instead of a one size fits all, it's about pragmatically looking at a smaller, very low risk operation and simple controls in place for that, right the way through to someone who's offering a regular weekly or daily dine-in experience where people are coming and enjoying whatever food is available for them, and whether there's one person doing it or 10 people providing it, that will have some complexity issues or simplicity issues, which you just need to be be mindful of when it comes to putting together your controls. So the four things to really consider are cross-contamination controls, cleaning up, cleaning the space, cleaning equipment. If it's being cooked, then cooking it safely, and that also includes keeping food hot once it's been cooked. So hot holding, we call that. Or if you're cooking to serve things later, we need to look at cooling that food down and then reheating it again, or serving it cold at some point. So it's about keeping temperatures in a safe zone at all times. And then finally, chilling or keeping the food cold, or defrosting, or cooling food down as rapidly as we can. So all of these things are kind of key: cleaning, cross-contamination, cooking, and chilling. We call those the 4 Cs, and then managing that whole sort of scenario, those settings. Um, Safer Food, Better Business, which is a pack that's been designed alongside the industry, with the industry in mind, and offered through food.gov.uk. It's a free downloadable template, or you can purchase the ready-made pages and packed and bound from many suppliers. Plymouth City Council do the same. We offer the packs ready-made, whether it's a retailer pack, and I'll explain the difference in a minute, or a catering pack. Slightly more involvement in the catering pack than it is the retailing. That means you're just selling or you're actually making food, the two differences. Those packs can be bought, can be downloaded for free from food.gov.uk, lots of other providers, or through our food safety pages at plymouth.gov.uk. There are charges that which applies, and they're around top £20, about £27, £28, I think, for a pack, where you get the pack, all the safe methods, and daily diaries, and allergen sheets as well, which I'll come to. So all of that comes together, and always the latest edition when you download ours as well. Um, if you're going to download it for free yourself, then it's around 90 pages from the food.gov.uk site. Retailer packs a bit smaller, so bear that in mind. You need a lot of paper in your printer. The retailer pack now is really for shopkeepers or people who receive food and offer it. So you can see where a shop is more similar maybe to some community larders, where you might pick up food and bring it back and then pack it and offer it. So that's more of a retail operation. So that might be more than suitable for most businesses to use as a standalone template to monitor the food safety that's happening or going on around your activity on the days that you do what it is you do. If you're taking some of that food and then turning it into other things like a soup or making pasties or sandwiches, then it might be better to look at the caterer's pack, which will have more involved of those other elements, such as the chilling, the cooking, the handling food. And obviously, more risks come with that than it does just simply receiving food and giving it out again. So those two packs might be a good idea. But then you might also look at making up your own simple rules, which we'll come to in a minute. So when it comes to SFBB, which we call Safer Food, Better Business for short, SFBB, it does need completing. So it's not just a ready-to-go pack that's got everything in it that you might need. It's got the template areas that you might need. So it helps you focus on the things that are important, but you still need to write in and tick boxes and tell us or tell the group that you're writing it for how you are handling food or what sort of cleaning arrangements you have in place. Are you using blue paper towel? Are you bringing cloth so you're going to take those home and wash them when you clean? Are you what kind of chemicals are you using on site? What things you expect food handlers to do? Will they wear an apron? Do they need to wear a hat? Obviously, yes or no. Or are you wearing gloves or not gloves? And those kind of arrangements need deciding and completing in your pack, in your SFBB pack. So SFBB needs completing and maintaining to suit your group. It needs to be tailored for your activity. Now, not all sections will apply. There will be bits that simply don't fit your operation. You may not handle any perishable food, so therefore the chilling sections and keeping food cold don't apply. Some aspects may not be covered, so additional controls may be required. And that might be, for instance, that you are receiving only packaged food and maybe very small amounts of other items, but you might be unpacking, say, blister packs of bread rolls and putting them into smaller bags. So there's a bit of handling involved there. Or you might be making a sandwich once a week, or a soup day might occur every now and again. And so long as the frequency is more than just once a year, kind of sporadic, or it's more than once a month, let's say, then you need to think about how that activity is happening, any risks associated, and supplement your SFBB pages with a bit of the cooking bits. So you might need to nick bits from the catering pack or write extra pieces about when it comes to the soup day. These are the things we'll do. We'll clean down first. We'll wash our vegetables. We'll cook things to make sure that they are thoroughly cooked and bacteria that might survive has been cooked through. So more than 75 degrees. How am I going to check that? Etc. Etc. Am I going to serve the food straight away? Or am I going to let it cool down, put it into pots, etc., etc. So all of those things will apply if you're handling food. And SFBB has the safe methods to help support you in providing that safely. When you've done an activity during the day, part of it is having all the correct procedures in place, but the other bit is actually demonstrating that you've followed your rules and that your volunteers and other food handlers have applied the controls that you want them to. So have they have you got a control sheet of where foods come from? So you might have done a pickup from, might have all come from FareShare, or it might have come from some local supermarkets. So having maybe a register or a control sheet that on Tuesday we picked food up from Lidl, we had a delivery from FareShare, or Mrs. Jones made us a cake. So having a register of where food comes from, and again, it needs to be just simple. If you are getting, it doesn't need to be onerous, should I say? Um, if you're getting food from an organization that provides you with a dispatch note, great. Just keep a copy of those dispatch notes, which will hopefully identify the consignment that's just arrived. Daily diaries are a way of you saying that I've followed my day's activities on that day and we've kept food safe. Everyone's been hygienically clean. This happened, and this is what I did when it happened to make sure that it wasn't a problem later on. So a little bit of an explanation about, say, odd occurrences or abnormal situations are always good to keep an eye on and keep a record of in your daily diary. So daily diaries normally come with 7 days worth of activities on a sheet if you're using one of the formatted ones in the SFBB packs. But if you're only meeting on once a week, or even less than that, say twice a month maybe, um, then it makes sense just to rewrite that yourself to have Tuesday and Wednesday repeated throughout a sheet. So don't go wasting loads and loads of paper if you're going to use one of those daily diary packs. Adjust it for yourself for your own activity. So maybe one page might contain several weeks worth of activity, if that makes sense. Now you might choose that not to use SFBB, and as I say, it's a great template to use, but it's entirely up to you. We're not prescriptive about that. Um, but if you choose not to, and your operation is, let's say, less complex, you just really what the things that you may need to consider are where food has come from, what's happened to it whilst you've had it, and what expectations you have of the food handlers doing that. So it might just be about um, distributing different items into different locations, um, and making sure that the people receiving those foods are kept safe. Now, we've talked a lot about hazards in terms of food hygiene, but there are also the hazards when we would suggest and recommend when it comes to maybe allergens or food intolerances. So many organizations will keep an eye on their recipients. So they might have a few details about the family they're providing food for. Um, and if that family comes back and keeps coming back, then you know that if unless things change, that you're providing them with the right food at the right time. Now, if that family member, that family group or that person has a food allergy, if you know about that in advance, if you know that it's John that's coming back on Tuesday morning for his parcel, but he can't have anything with nuts in it, then you need to make sure that his food doesn't have any nuts. Or if they're helping themselves to it, they can see that the food that's available has got all its labeling in place, and they can see and choose foods which are safe and suitable for them. Sometimes people might not want to disclose that, especially if they're in need and grateful for any food they get. They might not disclose some of the things at that time. So if you make the facility available for them, so they can sort of register their interest, and it's obviously confidential. That you can disclose they're disclosing that they can't have milk or they can't have gluten or something like that. You can make sure that their purchases, or sorry, their donated foods are suitable and safe for them. So if you're not using SFBB as a format, you can make up your own control sheets or a simple set of procedures. It can all be on an A4 sheet, where when food comes from our particular suppliers or shops, um, write them on the register. So just create a lined piece of paper or a sheet for a register of food, and just date it, and then keep that going, so you can see over time that you've had all the lines of receipts of food over certain days. And then we can come back if there is a problem. Let's say there's a recall, for instance. There's quite often recalls on foods. We know that Co-op have supplied you with XYZ batch. It's been recalled. but they have given it to you, so we can make sure that we can stay in touch with you and say, oh, that all that bread that was recalled, have you got any of it left? Can we send it back to, make sure you send it back to Co-op for redistribution, or sending back to be destroyed. So those sorts of things. Traceability is really important, so we know where food has come from and kind of where it's gone. If you're giving food out in a community larder, you might not know exactly who's had what food going forward, but it's a good step to know that on that day, that the food that came from ABC shop has been identified, so we can at least see some controls there. And obviously, in terms of simple rules, so just to register where food comes from, what happens to it when it's in your control. So what do you do with it? And again, some rules of expectations. The area is clean, it's free from pests, free from dirt. So some simple cleaning procedures that happen over the space or tables that you are operating from, or the small kitchen, etc. And that who came in on that day, who's the volunteers, so you can keep an idea of who helped you which days. Sometimes if you're doing 2 or 3 days a week and you might have 5 or 6 helpers each time, then that can get complicated if you're having to just remember it. So have a register, have a people who sign in and say, I'm here today to help out. But it's important that we all have that you have some means of system in place, food hygiene legislation requirements, and that you've got a means of demonstrating that you're following your procedures, regardless of how simple they are. Now, some simple procedures that might apply to volunteers, just to give you some ideas, are firstly fitness to work. So no one is coming along with an infectious disease, or they're not fit themselves, but they may feel that they want to still contribute. Um, Maybe don't appreciate the risk they might be putting themselves or others under. So it's important to understand that fitness to work is very, very important when it comes to food safety. So especially no sickness or diarrhea, or infections that might be passed on to others or made worse, open wounds, etc. Those sorts of things. If you're handling food in any capacity, you should be making sure that people are going home if they're suffering from any of those issues, or not coming in the first place. Uh, General rules would apply once that sickness or diarrhea has passed. We would ask you to apply a 48-hour rule so that it's no longer infectious. We often find that once your symptoms improve and you're back to normal a bit, 2 more days, and you are generally clear of having to of being likely to pass it on to other people. So 48-hour rule once symptoms have disappeared, and fitness to work kind of covers that. So it's about those abilities. Can they perform safely and not harm others? Whether you choose to provide people with aprons or other PPE such as gloves or hats, again, it's dependent on the activity that you're doing. If you're handling raw food, we would always recommend that an apron is used, or if you're handling open food, the same. So that's food that's not in packaging. If you're making up sandwiches and slicing it and putting them out for other people, you generally don't want to contaminate that food with your clothing, or your items that you might be wearing. And obviously, if you've got jewelry that is not necessarily needs to be worn whilst you're handling food, I'd recommend that people put it in their pocket, in their bag, or in a safe place, or don't come in with it. So it's about general food, personal hygiene, and fitness to work is key there. We would always like to see somebody who knows what they're doing handling food. If there's one person who does have an understanding of the risks and can easily communicate and talk to other people, it doesn't mean that everyone needs to be trained, but it would be advantageous to know that there is somebody there who knows what they're doing and can guide and instruct other volunteers and food handlers in their daily activities. Um, Key things is really when they're first starting, an induction training, a bit of a walk around, what it is, explain what it is they do, where the first aid kit is, um, where the hand washing is, where the aprons are, what's expected of them, those sorts of things. That's an induction kind of training. And if you've written that up, fantastic, fabulous. Just have those procedures in place so that when new volunteers turn up, you've got those simple ABC steps that you'll go through, or somebody who's uh, got some skills, or knowledge on the day can go to the book. What am I supposed to be telling this new person? They can easily see what's expected of them. Oh, okay, I'll show them where the toilets are. I'll show them where the wash hand basin is, where the cleaning stuff is, and what's expected of them on the day. Um, when it comes to safety matters, obviously, make sure that people are operating in a safe way. Again, people seem to think when it's in some cases where you're doing something as a voluntary activity, if you're just doing it from the goodness of yourself, maybe safety doesn't apply, but it absolutely does. So those same things apply: slips, trips, and falls, handling equipment, and making sure people aren't lifting more than they're capable of, working at heights, all of those things definitely apply. Housekeeping, um, brushing up, cleaning up around you, putting away waste, making sure nothing is left out or can become a hazard for others. Monitoring for pests, things like rodents, especially during the autumn and winter months. If as you move into many wildlife, uh, lots of wildlife will want to move indoors, and obviously during the summertime, you've got issues with crawling insects and flies, etc. So preventing those access and certainly not leaving any food debris around for them to enjoy after you've gone. So identifying those activities and writing those up simply so that you can communicate them to others is a great idea. Training, instruction, and supervision is one of those three things needs to be in place. Uh, Identify what tasks are in your operation and again, simply write it up. So your simple written activities, again, doesn't need to be more than an A4 sheet maybe, or two sides of if there's lots of things to do. But make it clear. Think about it, write it up, monitor it, see what you've written is actually happening, adjust it if need be, and then that then becomes your procedures. And then record keeping. So that could be a simple thing as saying, I followed my procedures on the day, nothing happened, everything was fine. So your daily activity is recorded as I've done it, as I've said, everything went smoothly, which is brilliant. That's all we want. If something doesn't go well, make a note of that, and then you can learn from that as you go forward the next day. When handling food or packaged food, even making sure that you're washing your hands as often as necessary. So certainly before you start work or start your activity, and if you take a break, or if you are doing a dirty job and then you have to return back to something that's not so, making sure that there is facilities there for hand washing. Should be hot water, should be some means to dry hands and some hand soap, preferably anti-bac hand soap for handlers to use in the activity. So all of those things are obviously key. There'll be many times during the day when you'll be washing your hands if you're working with open food. Uh, just mentioned in terms of fitness to work, the fitness or ability to carry out those tasks is really important. So I covered that just now when we talked about fitness to work. People want to maybe do more than they are physically able to sometimes, because they are generally good people. But just being mindful that those things don't happen to place anyone or themselves at harm. Okay, so when it comes to stock control or simple procedures, what we'd really expect of you and would like you to keep an eye out is where your food comes from. We would always recommend that you choose reputable suppliers or sources. And I know, as the saying goes, beggars can't be choosers. Um, you get your food from wherever you're grateful to receive it, but that reputability is important really to make sure it's coming from a good source, that it's not food that has been no longer fit for human consumption, but it's being given out anyway. Those sorts of things will only lead to problems. So reputable sources, um, having the facility to accept or reject food or return it. So making that agreement really before you take the food away. If you talk to the supermarket manager and say, appreciate you letting us have this cage full of food. If there is stuff that's not right, can I leave it with you? And can I pick and choose, or can I return it? And having that agreement, um, preferably in writing, that you can follow. Um, Many of them do offer that return or that basis, or so you're not simply moving on their waste. That's the last thing you want to be doing is having a lot of waste food to have to deal with yourself. Are the products suitable for distribution? So If you've got a community larder where you're helping poor families in your area to cope and work through their week to week food needs for their family, the last thing you want to be handling are sacks of flour or bulk packs of items of food, which are simply not practical. So again, suitability of distribution and products is really important there. If things are damaged and poor quality, or you've got more than you can handle, recognize that and send it back, return it, um, prevent it from becoming a problem. It will only end up becoming your problem if you've got more than you can actually handle. If your refrigeration space is massively exceeded because one day you've accepted a load of frozen soups, for instance. Okay, so don't only accept what you can handle. So when it comes to stock control in and out, um, keeping a record of your delivery notes or your consignment notes, things like that. A log of register of dates, as I've already said. So it could be a simple lined sheet of paper where you've got Lidl's 8th of the 6th, 2023, 10 loaves of bread, things like that. Or a consignment of breads and cakes to keep it loose. If you are looking at relabeling or providing, having to put over labeling on things, and that tends to become a bit more complex, you do need to talk to maybe the environmental health team near you to get some guidance and advice as what should be on a label. If you are taking food and packaging it to give to other people, it becomes pre-packed. Um, if you're doing that in small quantities to give face to face, it might all even be what we call pre-packed for direct sale. And forgive the word sale if you're giving it away, but it still applies. You might need to put labeling on, you will almost certainly need to put labeling on food that you are packaging yourself to give out, wrapped or packaged. Okay, so get some advice on that. There's lots of government advice again at the right pages and sites, and I think I've got some links at the end of this presentation. When it comes to storing foods, having sufficient capacity, as I've just said, there's no point in getting is having a small fridge and suddenly finding a lorry turns up with loads and loads of fresh items that you have to get rid of or sell or store in a very short space of time. It will cause you enormous headaches and problems and will potentially put the foods and others at risk. So when it comes to storage, making sure you've got enough chilled food capacity, enough fridges to keep it, that you're checking the dates. Most chilled foods will carry will often be perishable, especially if they're ready to eat. So stuff that you just open up the pack and you can either enjoy and eat as it is. They will carry what's called a use by date, as we've all seen, a durability date that must be used before. And that date is important not to exceed. So there are um, clear legislation in place that you cannot pass food on or offer food beyond its use by date. So date checking is really important. If you've got something that's short dated that you know is only going to be good for a couple of days, keep an eye on it, make sure it's identified, and make sure that food is gone the same day or the day after. Prevent it from becoming out of date, because you'll only have to dispose of it yourself. If you're chilling, if you're freezing chilled food to extend the life of it, I would urge you to look at the WRAP guidance to do that safely, to make sure the food is suitable to be frozen, because not all chilled food items can be frozen. They may have been previously frozen, or they may just not be suitable for freezing because of the nature of them. So can it be frozen? Is it able to? And making sure that you freeze it so that there is sufficient time before the date expires for it to be used. If today's the last day of it and you're freezing it today, you're really cutting it fine to make sure the end user can use it safely when they get it home and put it either straight in their freezer or cook it or put it into their fridge when they get it. They will have to use that item on the day that they receive it. So it's important not to make problems for people who are receiving food too. I know they might be grateful for it, but it might end up becoming more of a hassle and a problem and a hazard, which might cause illnesses down the road. So sufficient capacity and date and time available on food. If you've got chilled food arriving, making sure it's kept cold. There's the chill chain we call. So if it's food that needs to be kept cool, usually below 8 degrees, you should maintain that chill chain of below 8 degrees in it being received, um, transported, and then sorted, and then finally distributed. Keep it as cold as possible for as long as it can. If there are breaches in that, then you need to maybe consider having to waste that food or having to move it on and do something else with it. Frozen food, the same, exactly the same as we just said there, making sure that the temperature control is maintained and that it's in good condition, that nothing's been damaged, and that it's stored safely and correctly. Um, when it comes to ambient food or food that doesn't need temperature control storage, shelf stable food, we call that, things like tins, boxes, packets, cartons, etc. All that long life food. That's fine. Making sure you've got enough capacity to store that food is really important. So you're not getting too much in, or it's not moving out too slowly to cause you a backlog. And date rotation is also dead important too. So we have a rule in catering called first in, first out, which is simply the oldest gets moved quickly before the new stuff arrives, or the shortest date stuff is moved before the longer date stuff. And obviously ambient fresh fruits. So that could be maybe vegetables that you might be given, leeks, cauliflower, root vegetables, other fresh veg. Generally speaking, if it's whole fruit and whole veg, it will have a much shorter life, but it's generally safe to be stored at room temperature conditions and used as quickly as it can be. And eggs are included there too. Eggs have a special rule in terms of the best before date that they will all have. You must really be treating that best before date as a use by date when it comes to eggs. So you shouldn't be exceeding the best before date. And where possible, we would always encourage as long a date as possible on those eggs so that the end users can use them within a reasonable amount of time when they do receive them. Again, if you're getting eggs that's got the last day today and you're distributing them out today, it doesn't give anybody any scope to use those items safely. So think about what it is you're getting. Look at the quality, the reputable sources of where food's coming from. If you've got a supplier that's giving you lots of food, but the most of it or the bulk of it is having to go straight in the bin, are they a good supplier? Is it worth your trouble and your while? So think about those things. When it comes to back onto dates, really, the shelf life, I can't stress enough, is really important. Two rules to think about is if it's got a use by date, there are no exceedances. You can't go beyond it. Full stop. Where there's a best before date, look at the WRAP guidance to refer to. That's WRAP. If you just Google or use your search engine online to go to the WRAP pages, look at those guidance pages and documents for ensuring that that food is kept safe. Or speak to the distributor that's given it you about WRAP guidance. It may be that if you're taking food in that's got that is chilled, that you're deciding to freeze, um, you are now redating it and looking at relabeling requirements because you've changed the nature of that food. So there potentially are there are relabeling issues and shelf life matters that you need to seek advice through, preferably through the WRAP guidance, or as I say, the suppliers giving you the food. And finally, really, in this section, preventing cross-contamination or preventing contamination of any sort. So all the risks, things that can get onto and into food, like glass, hard plastics, chemicals, allergens, and bacteria. So have a mind of your operation, your chain of process from start to finish, and look at it through the lens of those things. Is anything likely to harm it along the way? Is glass, plastic, wood, any packaging, can it remain in it? Can it cause the food a harm? And deal with those risks if you do identify them. So they're about your. It didn't seem simple, but those are about those are the things that if you are doing it yourself and thinking of your processes to write up yourself and not using SFBB, those are the risk areas that you are going to need to consider if you're going to write your own procedures in your own way. So suppliers, stock control, storage, durability, previous slide, handling, fitness to work, training, etc., etc., are all applicable for you doing your own procedures. Um, these things also apply, of course, cleaning, having a good system in place. Always encourage a clean and clear as you go approach. So don't start another job before you finish the last job. Clean up properly, start again. Uh, daily tasks and checks is somebody overlooking to see that things are done in a good way, in a safe way, that's not putting other things or other people at risk. Um, are there any other routine tasks that you need to consider that might apply? And if something does go wrong, who should you tell? So having a means in place of reporting it to the organizer or the site if it's not your building, if something starts to leak or break, who should you tell? If you're running out of equipment, who do you go to get it replaced? And etc. Those sorts of things. Pest control, absolutely vital that you don't place food at any further risk. So signs of pests might be a funny smell, um, smell of urine, or a musty smell in corners and dark spaces or in cupboards, that sort of thing. Um, often can be quite acrid. Signs of pests could be droppings or dead insects or carcasses of mice and rats, that sorts of things if they've been left in a place. And what you're going to do about it. So is it your responsibility or is it the site owner's responsibility to control? Get it reported, get it identified, and importantly, keep food safe if there are risks there. If you need help identifying that, or if you believe there's a problem, the space that you're trying to do your activity, give us a call. Get pest control in if it's within your remit to do so, or urge the landlord or the owners to do the same. Now, when it comes to waste management, I did touch upon that a little bit. That you will not normally be permitted to take any waste from your organisation home to be treated as domestic. So exactly that. Don't take it home or dispose of it in green, brown, or black bins. Trade waste. There are lots of concessions for trade waste, especially charity. Sorry, lots. There are. You come under trade waste, but there are lots of concessions for charities. Um, there are schemes in place where bins and blue bag schemes. There are charges for those, and moving waste is the other issue. If you are taking waste from one site to another site, including home, then you need to register as a waste carrier, and it's always for a voluntary group likely to be a lower tier registration, which is usually free, but you need to ensure that you are registered as a carrier if you are moving waste. So it could be just a bin bag at the end of your day that you move on somewhere else that you put in the back of your car. You are a waste carrier at that point. So you need to register as a waste carrier, and that's simply registering yourself, your registration of your vehicle. So you go on a public register, but you are identified in terms of the Environment Protection Act. Um, okay. You can take charitable waste to Chelsea Meadow over the Weybridge, and it's free for a charity to do so. Okay, at the time of writing this slide. Breaks, faults, equipment failures, things like that um, might affect what it is you do, and certainly affect the safety and smooth running operation when they occur. So make sure that whoever's responsible is aware of it and can deal with it as quickly as possible. Um, common things that we see are lights that don't work, or a leak from a sink or a drain that because it's a space that's maybe given for free, the people using the site are afraid to rock the boat, or they don't want to sort of cause a problem, and they just struggle on without it. Really don't struggle. Get it dealt with, get it sorted, and have a means in place of doing so. Okay. Now, if you're a group that do take food and you are, as I mentioned just now, if you're taking food in order to extend the life of it, you're deciding to freeze it down, uh, there are risks that you can imagine are associated with that. It might not be. It could be just breads, for instance, but there are things in place that you need to consider. So, firstly, can it be frozen? Um, looking at how to date that and having what the durability dates and how they're affected by that activity. So if you've got a use by date on something which is now being frozen, you do need to redate it, but it needs to be redated sensibly. So if you're freezing something that's got, say, 2 days life on it already when you receive it, you freeze it on the day you get it, you've got less than 2 days to give it on defrost. So you need to consider labeling that item. You will need to label that item to indicate that on defrost, cook it or use it immediately and within 1 day or 2 days, according to the food that you are labeling. In a nutshell, that is. So the date of freezing and new frozen durability dates will apply, and we'd always recommend caution. Don't go to the 11th hour of the time that's going to expire just so that you can give it more time. Be more cautious of it. New durability date advice can be sought from the wrap guidance pages, and I stress again, once received, must not exceed the original remaining use by duration. If you are changing the nature of food by freezing it, you will need to provide consumer instructions to defrost, how to cook it, and these might be obvious things, but you do need to state it on your label. So defrosting, cooking and eating, and leftovers, etc. How to treat those um, on a new label that is applied to it, or on a sheet that's given with the food. That can also work in some operations. If you are portioning or repacking things, seek advice from your environmental health or trading standards team before you embark upon that. There will need to be a discussion in place about how that can be done safely and to meet legal requirements legislation. Best to avoid it, to be honest. Let others do that, and then you receive the smaller packed items. So handling food that you can manage and handle safely in the timescales that you're hoping to be able to do it is important. Don't burden yourself with additional things is my advice. But there is a number of things you need to consider if that's a route you're going to go through, and it will often require what we call a full hazard analysis or risk assessment for food, detailed food safety management systems, so stuff we've been talking about just now, but for that process that you're embarking upon. Proper labeling or new labeling, which includes all the mandatory requirements, some of which are there, etc. So you'll need to consider all those factors before you repack foods. If you're intending to decant or repack dry goods, again, seek advice from us. So if you've got a sack of flour you are going to put into bags of kilo bags, say, for people to go off and use, then same things applies. You need to consider how that's done, labeling, etc. When it comes to eggs, there is special bits of legislation that affect that. You should never be really repacking eggs from, let's say, Keys trays, which are the big square trays that can store lots of eggs, into little boxes. Members of the public can come and collect eggs from that in their own boxes, and you do need to provide them with the information on a card next to it, which will indicate how many days is left, so the best before date and where those eggs have come from. But you should not be repacking eggs at your community larder yourself into boxes, especially second-hand boxes, which will have all the wrong information on it. Okay. Multi-packs, recommend not to split those because there might be, again, labeling issues, bits of consumer information which are missed on the individual blisters inside the pack. And as already mentioned, if you're splitting bulk cereals, grains, flours, powders, etc., HACCP is required. Suitable safe packing materials and equipment and clothing are often required, and full labeling will be an issue in the matter. Okay. Obviously, if I'm going through too quick, go back through some of these to go back over them again. Okay, so when it comes to waste food, we do have the odd. I'm aware of the odd community larder that is absolutely doing the right things at trying to avoid waste, preventing food going to landfill or to be spoiled unnecessarily. And we do get asked the question about being able to pass it on to a small holding or a farm, where if they've got some surplus items, can they give it to the local farmer? Similarly to packing and splitting, there are specific legislations around turning food into feed. And again, registration is required with your local environmental health or trading standards team so that they know you're doing that. You need to make yourself clear and presented that we will occasionally send food to such and such a farm. for them to use. Um, there will be strict hygiene controls and controls on the types of food that you can send and supply, and HACCP again will be required, and strict traceability controls. Risks you may not consider. You may think, well, it's just a load of cauliflower I'm sending to the local pig farmer. But the last thing anybody wants is a new TB outbreak or another um, issue when it comes to harms to food. And some foods do have chemicals on them or processing aids which should not be going back into the food system. Okay, so there's more to it than you might think about saving food from landfill if you're thinking of sending it to a farm. Again, get advice before you decide to do that. So we're going to take a very short break here. And hopefully that's been useful to look at the overview of a community larder or an activity that's providing food to your community. When we come back, the next sections will be about basic food hygiene and something that we call the 4 Cs. Okay. Okay. So we've just had a little break. You may not have done, but here we go. We're just going to we've talked at length about the organisation and the things matters that need to be put in place when organising those events and those activities that community larders and food for the community might entail. Now we're going to look at the handling of food and something we call the 4 Cs, which as a caterer, if you're a caterer, then you'll know all about, and it's about keeping food safe. So if you're one of the volunteers and people who come and provide your time, um, which involves handling food and working with the food itself, then this bit's for you, and it'll be a good refresher if you've not done this for some time. So we'll go through what we call the 4 Cs now. Um, the symbols that you see there are reminiscent of the Safer Food Better business pack and its key areas, and it's a great pack to use. I would always recommend it. It's dead simple. All the red section is anything to do with preventing cross contamination, so it's personal hygiene, um, and ensuring that food is separate at all times or separated. And you've got allergens under control, especially allergens when it comes to affecting other foods or foods which are designed to be allergen free becoming contaminated when they're not supposed to. Purple sections are for cleaning, and generally those controls about equipment and what materials you use, and clean as you go and methods. And the benefits of having a schedule. I love having a cleaning schedule where your space has identified the things that need cleaning and how often and how they should be cleaned, such as worktops or a cooker, fridges, the hood above the cooker, that sort of thing, floors, walls, etc., etc. Mixing machines, more complex machines, and how often they are expected to be cleaned. Things like that. So it's a good idea to think about that and just step back and look at, well, what needs cleaning in my space, and then writing all of those items and surfaces down, and then deciding how each of those needs to be cleaned and how often. Many of them obviously will be after every use, but some things will be less frequently. And then the other controls, which we'll look through as we go through this, will be to do with keeping food cold or safely cooling or defrosting things. And then finally, the cooking section or the hot food sections, which we'll touch upon. Keeping food hot, reheating, that sort of thing. Okay, let's crack on. So, key in the 4 Cs, right in the middle of the cross contamination and front and center of it all, is personal hygiene. Washing your hands. It's about ensuring you've got thoroughly cleaned hands at all times when it comes. I'm actually rubbing my hands together now as I see that picture of a lady washing her hands under the tap. But making sure you've got all your hands all fully clean before you start work, between tasks, after breaks, handling dirty work, all of those times when you're coming back to touching a food item or a surface or equipment, that have you washed your hands again and again, and you'll wash them dozens and dozens of times during a working day or during an activity. So hot water, soap, and a means to dry them effectively um, every time you wash your hands is really important. Hand gels, they're good on clean hands. If you've got dirty hands and you're using gels to supplement and try and maintain hygiene standards of dirty hands using a gel. It just doesn't work. It takes a few seconds, but the dirt remains. And certainly when it comes to allergen controls, if you've got um, flour all over your hands, I'm a bad example there really. If you've just been handling nuts or celery or something else, or an item which is clearly allergenic for other people, um, a hand gel isn't going to remove that. So washing hands is absolutely important, or wearing frequent changes of gloves. I'm not a fan of gloves, but frequent changes of gloves if you are unable to wash your hands as often as you would like normally. If you're, say, for instance, working providing soup um, in a street to people late at night, so there are obviously considerations you need to think about. Personal hygiene is absolutely key. Um, Wearing an apron, to wear one or to not, it's a good idea if you've got aprons available if you're handling open food, and especially if you're handling open food after handling raw food. So a change of aprons is again recommended, or having a disposable over apron, which can be worn during those dirty or very high risk tasks, such as chopping up meat or chicken for making into a dish. Wash your hands, take the apron off. Sorry, take the apron off and wash your hands, and then put another apron on, or have your normal apron for now finishing that item off or making something else. So um, consider that cross contamination risk from yourself, from your hands, and things that you've touched, or the food itself. So at all times, when it comes to handling open food, avoid cross contamination. Always wash hands thoroughly, and I'm not going to apologize for repeating that phrase a million times, especially after handling pets and especially reptiles. You might think, well, why about reptiles? Um, there are many harmless and wonderful pets that people have, which are reptiles, which will endemically carry salmonella. So it's again avoiding that risk when it comes to family food and handling food. Always encourage children to wash their hands after handling a pet before they eat food or prepare and make food. Uh, Always wash your hands after handling the toilet, after using the toilet, handling waste, putting rubbish out, or scraps, that sort of things, or handling soiled clothing, nappies, laundry, etc. And before serving, handling, or eating food at all times. Never wash or rinse meat. Meat does not need washing. We should all know that by now, especially poultry. I still find the odd person who still does what their mum or their gran used to do and wash the chicken before they cook it. There's absolutely no need to do so. And in doing so, the risk of spreading Campylobacter and other bacteria far and wide across your kitchen worktop, sink, taps, hands, apron are immense. Most cases of food poisoning that we find that are bacterial based are still Campylobacter, or Campy as we affectionately call it, and it's often comes from mishandling chicken. Um, can also be brought in from pets from the outside as well. So, but never wash meat. Is no need. Cooking it to the right temperature is enough to kill bacteria, and any perceived issues with the sliminess of meat. Chicken can have a little bit of a slime about it. People might not like to handle it, but once it's been cooked, it's perfectly safe, and all adds to the flavour, doesn't it? Don't handle raw food and then cooked food without washing your hands. Now, repeating that's on the slide, I'm not really a fan of people repeating words on a slide, but I can't stress enough the importance of washing hands, especially when it comes to uh, handling raw and then ready to eat food items. You might just simply forget that you've just done a bit of the dish that's involved the raw meat part, or prawns, etc., that sort of thing, and now you're just moving on to the salad or the bread. And those are the key issues. Burgers are a classic where you might put the burger on the griddle and then turn it and flip it and then go and get the bread bun. You need to wash your hands before you touch those other ready to eat items that make up the dish. Use separate chopping boards and equipment for raw and cooked foods. And that might mean having a set of tongs for the raw bits of the meal preparation, and then another set of tongs and slices for the end bit. So, using the example of a burger, um, uh, something which is clearly different to putting the meat onto the griddle or the pan, then another piece of equipment to take the hot cooked food off. So you've got no cross contamination of those bits of equipment, and into a different place and space rather than where the original burgers were. Have it separated by space. Uh, if you're doing a multitude of tasks to make food for a day, then thinking about how you're going to do it, how to order your activities so that the raw bits of prep never cross contaminate the ready to eat bits of prep. So separate it by time and space and cleaning. Two-stage cleaning, which we'll come to in a minute, is really effective. Hot soapy wash and then a wipe down and then a spray with an anti-bac spray. So first stage is the hot soapy bit, second stage is the spray. Okay. Store foods correctly. Never put raw foods in a fridge, for instance, above ready to eat foods. Make sure that any raw meat can't drip onto other things. Put it into a tray or a bowl or a box which is not able to drip onto other things. Generally speaking, we should all know that raw meat, raw poultry, etc., should be lower than ready to eat food in a fridge. And always operate using good sanitary sprays. Best really, although it's entirely up to you what you have at home. If you do like that lemony fresh or that summer meadows on your worktops, I'm not a massive fan, especially when it comes to a catering arrangement, a catering organisation. You should have fragrance-free, good sanitizers to spray down and keep worktops clean. But at home, it's a different matter, isn't it? Cleanable cloths or clean cloths, a good supply of them for the day's activities is essential. Or if you're not using cloths, a good supply of paper towels to see you through. And make sure that all food surfaces are clean, ready for use. That clean as you go approach. So it's a combination of preventing cross-contamination has got clear links with cleaning and handling issues. Okay. And although front to back, really, this should really have been at the beginning. Observe safe food handling and sickness rules at all times. If you're handling food and you're starting to become unwell, it may be that you need to get yourself out of that space quickly and let somebody know that the food you just handled, if it's ready to eat food, might need to be discarded if you've got symptoms yourself. So don't place others at risk. The safety of people using that food or enjoying that food comes absolutely first, than before food waste. Now, allergens. We can all appreciate that well, maybe not. I'll quickly cover it, of course, but allergens are a big concern when it comes to people who do have a food allergy to preventing illness or problems that are associated with their condition. They'll be very mindful about foods and things that they can have and can't touch, and you need to respect that and give them the choice to, with the right information, to decide to accept or not accept it. So when it comes to volunteers and low risk providers that do not need to register, so if you decide or we've decided that it's not registrable because the activity is so infrequent and so uncomplex, simple in terms of its operation that we don't really need to know about it, you should still have an obligation to look after that food for that person or that event. Let's say a school fete, that sort of thing. Make sure that that food that you're providing for that one-off or very low risk event is still safe. However, there is no legal requirement for you to identify allergens on food, but we would recommend that you take some precautions. If you are one of the many voluntary organisations that do need to register, then yes, there should be controls over the food that you're providing. So you understand the ingredients, you've got an idea of the recipe and what it's come into contact with, and you can pass that information on that the soup today has got mustard and celery in it, for instance. So that recipient knows that what they're having is suitable for them. It's always a good idea, regardless of that, though, if you are knowing what's in the food that you're providing. Just further notes here for the people out there who are very low risk providers who don't need to register. Unless you can be absolutely certain, best not to make any allergen-free claims. You might be doing it of all in all goodness, basically saying, well, I haven't put any flour in this, it's a gluten-free cake. But there might be gluten on the surfaces that you have just been making it at home or making it in the space. So there could be that risk that gluten can still get in, or even maybe the way it's displayed or stored from other cakes and items around it could easily contaminate that item. So best avoid making claims that food is free from um, if you've not got it completely organized. Okay. Sometimes a trace amount, which is very, very small, is all it takes to trigger a food hypersensitivity in somebody who's got allergens. Um, Labels should always indicate allergens otherwise. So could be a simple card in front of the food that says veg soup today contains celery, and hidden allergens can be found in stock cubes, and those other products or other sauces that you might add to enhance the flavour of things. It's a really good practice to identify your consumers' allergens or intolerance requirements um, before they are receive the food or before you provide. And again, many community larders where they understand who their recipients are. They have a very small, simple registration procedure. They know that this family cannot have eggs because somebody in the house has got an egg allergy. So having that information at hand, so you know that that person is not placed at risk unnecessarily. If you've got walk-in consumers or people who just come in and they you don't know who they are or what their history is or whether they have any allergens, or if you're providing soup at a soup run, for instance, where somebody's just coming to receive some food on the night, it's great practice to ask everybody, are there any allergens today? And then you can talk through them, walk through it, and you've got that information to hand so that you can provide them with a safe meal that night or a bag of food which is suitable for them to go away and enjoy. Okay, cleaning. Really, really important to make sure that we have surfaces and areas clean to prevent cross-contamination and bacteria. So simple procedures are that we all um, should follow this really. So preparing food ready for washing, getting rid of any food debris into a bin, giving it a good soapy hot wash to clean it, rinse it off, and then make sure that it is disinfected following that. So these processes are what we're looking at really. Everything needs to be cleaned, but some things also need to be cleaned and disinfected. Cleaning does not remove bacteria to a safe level. What washing does is remove all the food debris and any large amounts of anything that we don't want on that item or that equipment. So it's washed away, but there will often be traces and colonies of bacteria, for instance, that can grow again quite rapidly given the right conditions. So having the wash bit first, which is the step one, and then a disinfection stage afterwards, really then does remove bacteria to a safe level. So always operate to a high standard of clean. Make sure that areas and space and equipment is clean. I always like to use the phrase as new. So it's as if you've walked into a brand new kitchen every time. So you've got it all there ready to use. Clean once something's been used up, yeah, used in a process, it's washed and put away like it's new again. Uh, Cleaning schedules, as I said just now, I actually think are a brilliant way of making sure that everyone understands what clean means and how to clean something. So it's not an ambiguous, make sure you clean the oven. What does that really mean? So making sure you've got that oven space clean, that the racks are, that the control buttons at the front are properly cleaned, etc., etc., and using the right chemicals for the right job safely. Uh, Sanitizing sprays or disinfectant sprays, difference between them is generally a disinfecting spray is the domestic term. So it's a spray disinfectant which removes bacteria to a safe level, given a bit of time. Commercial sanitizing sprays often have a little bit of a soap in them, so something to loosen and remove dirt and debris, and an antibacterial agent that usually works rapidly or quicker than most domestic sprays. And you can use a sanitizing spray twice so that you do spray once and clean and wipe off, leaving it for the right amount of time, and then a second spray to do the disinfection stage. So you can have one product to do it all. That's especially useful to know if you're out and about, if you're at a soup run and you're cleaning your table down again. So you spray it, you wipe it, and then you spray again to disinfect that surface in that area. Keep all surfaces and equipment clean. Think about where food and equipment is stored, especially food contact surfaces. Um, keep waste, waste packaging and food waste down to a minimum, making sure that it's discarded correctly, and ensure that all of your storage chemicals are stored away safely and away from food surfaces, so they can't contaminate food or the surfaces you're going to work on them with. Dishcloths should always really, if you're going to reuse them, be washed in a hot wash and never with other soiled home laundry items. So washcloths, tea towels, things that are used for the food side separately to other laundry items and in as hot a wash as you can. And correct hand washing procedures should also be followed as well. Okay, so ensuring that we are checking food areas regularly as well comes under the cleaning remit, and making sure we are checking store areas for signs of pests often and regularly. Looking for simple signs: food debris, spoiled items, insect carcasses, etc., like that. Damaged food packaging is a big sign that you've got a problem with pests, especially packets of things. Having a satisfactory general cleanliness level or a good housekeeping system in place should be the goal here, really. Now, when it comes to storing food, making sure that the food storage arrangements are suitable, whether it's ambient storage or chilled storage or frozen storage. When it comes to storing food cold, legal requirements do step in. Food that is designed to be chilled, perishable foods which should be kept chilled, i.e. carry a use by date, should usually be stored below 8 degrees. 0 to 5 or 1 to 5 is a good guide to make sure your fridge is operating at, and that the food inside is stored at that good temperature. It will ensure that the life of the food is preserved for as long as possible. So when it comes to storing food, keeping an eye on that temperature is really important. Freezers isn't guided by legislation. It's certainly best practice, and we'd recommend that freezers should be minus 18 degrees or colder. When they start getting to minus 12 or minus 11 or minus 10, things start to form ice crystals and start to break down. So that freezing starts to become less effective. So the quality of the food and the durability of the food is affected the less frozen it is, let's say. So minus 18 in freezers. When we're talking about fridges, though, your fridge should operate below 8 degrees, and it's the food inside that we're looking to keep an eye on, not the temperature of the fridge per se. So it's the food inside is kept below 8, not necessarily the operating temperature of the fridge. Freezers less than minus 18, like I say. When it comes to storing food, that's meant to be it's shelf stable, so it can be stored under normal room temperatures, keeping it cool, dry, and again out of direct sunlight, for instance, and away from pests, and keeping those areas clean. Fridges, freezers, and storage areas like shelving needs to all be kept as clean as possible. So regular cleaning, again, that cleaning schedule should include your fridges and shelves and the freezer. A regular routine defrost and a clean of everything in it should be on that schedule. For monitoring and chilling or freezing foods, we're talking about keeping food for as long as it's designed to be kept. Always below 8 degrees, and effectively, like I've just mentioned, is between 0 and 5 degrees as to store food in a fridge. And that food, if freezers can be colder than minus 18, it will keep for much longer. Chest freezers are often more effective at keeping food cold than upright freezers. They have to work a bit harder to achieve the same. And bear in mind, when you open and close a door, the temperature is going to increase each time. Okay, so when it comes to the 4 Cs for chilling and freezing, you should regularly check your fridges at least twice a day. Start of the day is always good, so you know overnight it's been maintained. Fridges and freezers, that is, and that they're running to those effective temperatures, as we just said. And if you're very active during the day, another time during the day might be a good idea, and the end of the day. So start and finish of the day is a minimum, really. When you've got food deliveries to put away that do require refrigeration or freezing, make sure that's done quickly, and that priority is given obviously to high risk foods. There's foods that require to be chilled and frozen. Always cover and store raw meats on a lower shelf or area than any cooked food or cooked meats, salads, cheeses, etc. that should be on a slightly higher shelf. So think about the risk of how you store things. Raw meat, poultry, etc. should be on the bottom, maybe raw fish after that. Um, um, Eggs usually are in a door, aren't they? Or if they're kept in the fridge, they can be kept quite safely these days. Line marked eggs in a cool space in your cupboard as well. But then as you're going up through the shelves in the fridge, it's salads, ready to eat foods, as opened, sliced, packed meats, for instance, that sort of thing, on the top shelf. Observing obviously the durability of those dates. Store and label and date leftover food safely and sensibly. Many kitchens don't even give it a thought. We find they maybe a single cook or chef that might have I'm going to give everything 3 days. Not everything is suitable to be kept for 3 days. There are some foods, once you open the packaging, might only have a short life, might have once opened, used within 24 hours on it, or less than 2 days. Bear those dates in mind, and we'd always advocate and recommend that you stick a number on it, you stick the date that you've opened it, and then the durability date of that item. That way, you can keep an eye on it and make sure that it is discarded on the last day or used up the last day of its shelf life. Don't want to see food in fridges that are beyond their shelf lives. Put people at risks. Just puts people at risk. Okay. Same when it comes to freezers, by the way. Just before I move on to that next point, if you've got food that you're freezing, put a label on it before you freeze it. Put the date of freezing on it, and give it a term. Give it a durability period, month, 2 months, depending on what that food is. Something reasonable so that you know that when you go back into it, you know that food item needs to be used up before the end of October. When it comes to fridge and freezer faults, identify that fridges might start to operate warmly, maybe not be as effective. You might come in the morning and find that it's running at 10 degrees. That might be a sign that it needs some attention. So make a note of it. Make any actions that are required to keep that food safe as you go forward. It might be that you need to put food into a different fridge or even discard the food and call an engineer and replace the item if it's faulty. Same with freezers. Don't ignore it if it's not performing as it should do. Always observe use by dates and discard any out of date food on the last day of that date. It should never be in the fridge the following day. It should always be your end of day task to check the shelf life of food, or during that day to make sure you've thrown away any food that's going to become out of date tomorrow. Stock rotation, use up, distribute older stock first. We call that principle first in, first out, or FIFO. Okay, now when it comes to cooking, if that's what you do, then cooking should always be done so that food is cooked through thoroughly to make sure that food has got no harmful bacteria remaining in it or on it. And a good rule of thumb, there's a number of different temperature and time combinations, but a good rule of thumb really is to adopt to 75 degrees for 30 seconds, which is of course piping hot. You won't be able to consume food that hot, so it needs to be piping hot. Good bubble all the way through if it's a soup or a stew, so it's properly bubbling after a stir, not just in the middle or one place, because product may not be completely cooked through. It might be bubbling away at the bottom where the heat is concentrated, but still cool on the top. So keep food moving all the time if it's a soup or a stew, for instance. Roast foods, stick a knife into it. Is it bleeding? Is it coming out? Roast meats, for instance, is there any sign of pink juice? Keep it cooking for longer. If you've got a temperature probe, great. Probe the thickest part of the meat and look at what that reading is. It should always be over 72, 75 degrees before you consider taking it out and serving it. So keep hot food hot. Once it's been cooked, if it's not going to get served immediately, it should be kept hot in somewhere in a place where it's going to be able to be maintained above 63 degrees. When it comes to, if you're keeping food hotter for longer than 2 hours, it has to be kept hot and above 63 degrees during that time and over those times. If it's going to come out the oven, get sliced up and served, it can be allowed to cool if the anticipated storage time is going to be much less than 2 hours. That's also fine and safe. So if you've got a roast to do and you've got a hot food buffet, for instance, you know that the meat's coming out, everyone's going to eat the food within a short space of time. You don't necessarily need to observe that 63 degrees temperature. But if you're cooking something off, or pastry items as well, they need to be kept hot. If you're cooking something for now to use later, then you should cool it rapidly. Cool it as quickly as you can somewhere around the kitchen. Don't put hot food straight in the fridge. You will affect all the other food in the fridge. So if you can take it out, portion it off, maybe cool it down rapid. Smaller food items will cool down more rapidly, smaller portions than a whole big pan of something or a big piece of food. So cutting it up, encouraging it to cool down quickly before it's then refrigerated or frozen. So that cooling down process should be within 90 minutes. It's a really good idea and best practice to ensure that food that has been allowed to cool down once it's been cooked after a 4-hour period. So that buffet again is key there, having an understanding and knowledge that food should not be allowed to remain out of temperature control for periods of longer than 4 hours. Reheat food thoroughly, like a cook. It shouldn't just be a warm through. It should be back to piping hot again, 70 plus, 72 degrees plus, um, until it's served again. So, and only once is best practice. Okay, so there are 4 C's. Uh, so in terms of a general checklist, I've put together this little list here when it comes to keeping food safe if you're handling food. And bottom line is keeping spaces clear and clean at all times, ensuring that there's adequate cleaning materials and equipment needed to keep that space clean. Don't run out of things. We quite often turn up to kitchens and say, "Oh, I've just run out of the anti-bac spray. Fancy that." And we know that it's probably ran out on Monday and it's now Thursday. Check for pests. So ensure that you've got um, a regular observation of your store areas, of your working spaces, especially if you've got open areas to the outside, which might be a route in for mice, for insects, or other vermin to enter. And obviously checking food deliveries that aren't bringing insects in with them as well, and unwanted pests that way. Ensure everyone knows what they are doing and how to implement your controls. Um, Wherever possible, minimize handling of foods. If it doesn't need touching or handling, then don't. Just move it on, sell it on, pass it on. Ensure all food is stored properly. Keep it dry or cool or frozen as required. And store foods away in a way that the older stuff is always to the front and used up before other stuff. If you're packing and distributing food parcels, when you're adding temperature controlled foods to that parcel, so stuff that's been in the fridge or freezer, make sure that they're the last minute things. So before that box is collected or goes out, that you're not having the chilled or the perishable foods hanging around out of control for any longer than it is necessary. When it comes to records, simple things will be to, as we've kind of said right at the beginning here, is to keep a record of distribution notes or delivery dockets, that sorts of things, or receipts. Keeping a tab of your customer or consumer records so you can identify allergens or food requirements. A temperature check so you can see that your fridge and freezers are always working correctly each day, and you've got means to prove that. So keeping a record of those. Hot food cooking, if you're doing that during the day, keep a record of that maybe a representative check during the day. So you've got several items you're cooking. Just keep an idea of evidence of one of those items. Say if you're doing a batch of things that it was at the right temperature, you've not changed your procedures, and you can demonstrate that it was hot because this was the temperature that you recorded. If you've got pest control coming in to help you manage an issue or keep an area safe and free from pests, keep those logs. If you're not having a pest control service come in and manage things with you, then you need to identify in your own controls that you have checked that the area is free from pests periodically. When stuff goes wrong, that's what you need to record. We don't necessarily want to see daily diaries that got all fine, no problems today, forever, because we know things go wrong in a kitchen or in a business. So it's that exception reporting which is really informative. So fridge went down today, called an engineer, moved the food into fridge number 2, all was sorted out, no problems. That's the kind of information we want to see. Or we found a mouse today, called a man, called the engineer in, he laid some bait. That's sort of exception reporting that's really useful. You can learn by it. We can see what happens. If things start happening again and again, encourage other volunteers to write down stuff that happens as well. It's always useful to see and great feedback when we get positive feedback to keep a record of that. It's always nice, and equally important to keep hold of complaints or somebody says something wasn't right. Um, Often when it comes to voluntary food, sometimes people can be reluctant to seem as if they are complaining unnecessarily or not grateful. So they might be less willing to complain. But I would always encourage that if there's any problems with anybody, people do say that yes, no, actually this wasn't quite right, or that was off, and what happened here. So you can investigate it, and of course record any incidents or accident details that might occur to an event or at a workplace. That's very important, so you can learn from those mistakes, and if necessary, we can see what happened and assist. Okay, so that's the bottom line, the things to do, keeping food safe, some simple checks that you should have in place as a summary. Now, when it comes to food inspections, if you've registered and you're newly registered, we'll probably want to come and see you and see how it is you work and how the operation works, and look at what management systems you've got into place and what records you're keeping. They're usually not onerous visits. They can often be less than an hour, and we'll ask a few questions, we'll look at a few things, we might take a few photographs, and we'll generally leave you in peace, knowing that things are managed to an adequate level, to a satisfactory level. Um, in many businesses or many instances, you might be familiar with the food hygiene rating scheme. If you're in the voluntary food sector, it's very likely that you won't be included in that scheme. So if you're a soup run providing soups on a Thursday, on the first Thursday of every month to 50 or 60 people, we probably won't give you a food hygiene rating, but we still need to do that inspection visit to make sure that the place where the food is being made is safe and hygienic and standards are being followed. And we might even come out to the actual one of the settings where you're distributing the food at that point to watch that the other aspects of the front end bit is also being managed safely as well. So bear that in mind. We want to try and support and help there. So when it comes to low risk activities, it will be usually minimal or very light touch. Um, we'll expect to we'll provide a risk assessment of from our view a risk profile of the operation, and we'll do all of that bit in behind. But it would be very rarely we'll produce that and it will turn into a food hygiene rating. You know, one of those 0 to 5 ratings you see on the green and black stickers. But it will determine how often we come and view you, or how often we come and carry out that inspection visit um, going forwards. We might provide you from time to time some things to improve on. There might be areas where you may have missed, or things that we've seen that you may not have thought about. So we may well issue you a report or a schedule of works, we call it, which some of which may be recommendation based, or others might be legal requirements. But they're generally there to help you come up to at least a minimum legal standard, so that you've got those problems not presenting something a problem in the future. And we'd expect usually to see that's done in a specified space of time. It might be a few days. It might be something that's fairly important that you get nailed quickly. So it might be immediately to resolve this, or within the next day, or it may be something have considered within 3 months, but certainly always before the next inspection visit. If we find things recur again and again, we might think that there's a bit of an ongoing problem here. So for those reasons, official controls do apply. And what that does mean, it's that risk assessment, that inspection is what we call an official control, and any schedules of works or issues that we require you to complete are completed. They are official requirements. They're not please do it. They are, you must do it. Okay. But they're there to keep your recipients, your service users safe and your volunteers safe. Um, and that's the bottom line of them all. Routine periods between inspections will often apply, and they might even be usually longer than 2 years. So you might see us when you first get going. You might not see somebody again for another couple of years, unless there's an intervention or a complaint or something, a service request. Or something significant changes. If there are significant changes, if you've gone, say, let's from a community larder that just had dry goods to something that's now offering chilled foods, so you've got a fridge in place, that's probably significant. So we want to pop our heads in and just see what changes you've made to make that change um, suitable, satisfactory, and safe. Or it could be that you're a larder and you're now providing open food. So again, a significant change. Or it might have changed hands completely, that the person organising it has moved on and somebody else has taken over. Those again are significant changes. Um, Okay. We don't always need to come and do a site visit. We might do a training course like this and require or ask you to attend. Um, they're what we call in alternative enforcement methods. We might ask you to fill out a questionnaire just so that we can see that things are trundling along as safely as possible in the future. And as I've mentioned, food hygiene rating scheme, well, probably not, unless you are volunteers who are operating in a cafe or you've got a proper community cafe going. Then yes, maybe if the public would recognise that as a place to come and eat, then yes, we would probably rate you and turn your risk assessment and that risk rated inspection into a score. But otherwise, no, not usually. It's usually something that we keep as part of our procedures to ourselves. We may let you know as well what those rating scores have been like. Okay, so we'll make the risk rating calculation. We'll carry that out, but we might not make it public. Okay, so that brings me to an end. I hope that has been useful and a good refresher for anyone who's working in food or coming back to handling food, or just becoming a volunteer for the day. It's a really good, use that 4Cs section, for instance, as a good refresher for any new people starting with you. So they can ask you a few questions about what this means, what you've just seen on the slide, maybe something you can challenge or question if you're just looking at this for the first time. For further information at the time of printing this or producing this, you can come to our plymouth.gov.uk pages, search that link there for any guidance and tips and things that you might find of use going forward. And there's always the food.gov.uk pages in England, or if you're in another part of the UK, you'll have Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well for the same services. And legislation varies slightly between the different countries if you're outside of this organisation. Okay, any direct questions you might have for me and my colleague Emma, who we're currently the leads for the voluntary food sector. There's my email address and Emma's email address there. So do drop us an email. Good to speak to you. If you've got any questions, no matter how small or silly it seems, ask it, because we can always come back and give you the response. Okay. Hope you found this useful. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye now.